For real.
You ready? Yep. Okay. Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, there have been a lot of developments in Ukraine. Russia has talked about sort of some shifting objectives and tactics in the war. What do we know now?
So it's important to remember when the war started in late February, both Russia and the U.S. expected the capital, Kyiv, to fall within days.
Right.
And so that didn't happen. It couldn't have been further from the truth.
Right.
Russia continued to try to conquer the capital for weeks, and then ultimately withdrew those troops and refocused their energy in about late March, early April, in the Donbass, the eastern region. And that's where the fighting has been predominantly since then. And they've made incremental progress, but over the last couple months, that incremental progress has added up. As General Milley said, they've gained about 10 miles of land in that time, which sounds like a lot, but you remember that's over a period of months now. And the foreign minister for Russia said earlier this week that they will be expanding the scope of their military operations into a couple additional cities further in the heart of Ukraine, which was not necessarily unsurprising, considering what we've been told both from the U.S. and from the Russian government themselves, their original objectives were, which is to take the entire country.
So Putin has been fairly isolated since Russia invaded Ukraine, but Putin now has a pal overseas who he's gone to visit, might be collaborating a little bit with the Russian war effort, even as we're in negotiations with him. Talk a little bit about where he went and what we're discussing.
So for the first time since the war began, Vladimir Putin this week left the former Soviet bloc and traveled to Iran. And this was a trip that was announced, but a couple days before he got there, the Biden administration came out and said there was evidence or intelligence that suggested Iran was planning to sell hundreds of UAVs or drones to the Russian government so they could implement them in Ukraine. Now this is a dramatic step, an escalation. It brings Iran into the war. The U.S. has warned against this from happening, and we know from Jake Sullivan that even prior to President Putin's trip to Iran earlier this week, there were Russian representatives who met with Iranians in Iran about these drones. And so now President Putin went to Iran. He met with Iranian leaders. They gave him support for his war, setting an us versus them, with pitting them on the same side against the U.S. and against the West. And so he has found a lifeline in Iran, and it's interesting because in the one, even though they have generally considered to be a better military, the one aspect that they're lacking is air superiority and air dominance, specifically in Ukraine. So this could be a way for Russia to try and change the landscape of the war.
But the West and the United States have some things that they want to do to help Ukraine on that front.
Absolutely. So also earlier this week, we heard it was the monthly convening of the Defense Contact Group, which was started by Secretary Austin at the start of the war. It's defense ministers from all across the U.S., Europe, and the world, really. They come together once a month for these meetings. Sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's virtual, and they discuss what's happening on the ground and what they need to do to ensure Ukraine has the ability to keep fighting.
Right.
And so during this meeting, the U.S. announced the newest aid package going to Ukraine, and it'll include 4 more HIMARS. Now, these are large rocket artilleries that that Ukraine has used to hit about 30 Russian control centers. That's what a statistic given to us by the Ukrainian defense minister earlier this week. And now the U.S. has provided, when you include the 4 in this new package, a total of 16. And they really have proven to be somewhat of a game changer on the ground, but at the same time, it's a question of, is it enough? And we asked that question because the Ukrainian defense minister said they needed more than 50 to effectively hold the enemy back and 100 to launch an effective counterattack. And so while the U.S. and other countries are doing a lot, they're not quite meeting the Ukrainian requests.
Finally, Secretary of State Blinken had a very stark warning about what Russia's objectives are in Ukraine. What is the update there?
Absolutely. So a number of administration officials this week have announced that they believe Russia has the intention of annexing territory from Ukraine. Now we're talking a lot of the regions we're seeing where the fighting is going on, specifically in the Donbass. And some of that extends to further cities like Kherson. And so it's not the first time we've heard administration officials warn about the possibility of annexation, but it's the first time a level of a person of this seniority has made these types of warnings. And part of it is he made these warnings and then Sergei Lavrov made his comments, and the White House then responded by saying his comments sort of
follow the Crimea playbook from 2014.
And it sort of confirmed what they had said about the annexations.
Right.
And so it really will be interesting to see. Both sides seem to be gearing up for a new phase.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.